Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Computer Science and Engineering Workshop. This is your host, Dick Ottoman speaking. And in today's video, we're going to be learning about what loops are in programming, and then we're going to be practicing them in C programming language. So without further ado, let's jump straight in. Okay, so a loop is this part of the program that repeats itself until a certain condition is met, or rather, a certain condition becomes false. So let's say that our program arrives at our loop. So loops have two main parts. The first part is the condition of the loop. So if the condition of the loop is true, then the loop body will execute. So after the execution of loop body, which is the code that's within the loop body that repeats itself as long as the condition is true. After we execute the loop body, if the condition is true, we come back at the loop body. We execute the loop body, go to our condition, check if it's true. If it is true, we execute the loop body and then come at our condition. We check our condition. If our condition is false, we stop the loop. Okay, so in programming, there are two different types of loops. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a sentinel controlled loop. In a sentinel controlled loop, instead of stopping after a certain amount of iterations, it stops when a certain variable becomes a certain value. The value that the loop stops at is called a sentinel value. Until a variable becomes the sentinel value, the loop continuously repeats itself. Okay, so the second type of loop I'm going to be talking about is a counter-controlled loop. So with a counter-controlled loop, what happens is that we have a counter variable. So our e variable here is our counter. As long as this e variable is smaller than n number here, this loop will continue executing. In each execution, if we don't want our loop to end up as an infinite loop, what we need to do is we need to increment this I variable here. In each execution, the I variable will increase and eventually it will become equal or greater than this n here, depending on the way you set it. And then our loop will stop executing. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to, actually every single time I forget to do this before I actually begin the video. It's main, our entry point, yada yada yada. Okay, so now the first one I want to show is going to be a sentinel controlled loop. So I'm just going to define a sentinel value here. Let's give it 999. So we're going to have a variable called, let's call it input, and then n. Actually, let's just call this grade. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to write a program to calculate the average grade of an amount of students in a classroom. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, actually, before we begin, I'm just going to set this to 0. There we go. So as long as grade does not equals to sentinel, which is going to be negative 999. We're just going to set this to 0 here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say scanf underscore s. It's going to, if we don't use the underscore s here, it's going to prompt a unsecure function, but maybe in your IDE it may not be as big as a problem. So we're just gonna, actually before this we should say printf enter grade. It's gonna now expect a grade, and then what we're gonna do, oh wait, no, we're supposed to have a total here, which is gonna equal to 0 here. So what I want to say is, after we receive the grade, we want to add it to our total, and then we wish to increment the n. And then there we go. Okay, so actually, no, wait. Even if we enter our sentinel value, it's still gonna add it. So what we should probably do here is, I'm just gonna say if grade does not equal sentinel. Okay, so now this is only gonna happen if the grade is not equal to the sentinel value. So here we're just gonna print out the average, and then here I'm just gonna say, actually, let me just total divided by n, and then exit 0. Okay, so this is a while loop that works off the logic of a sentinel controlled loop. So let's run and see what happens. What is the error? Did I use print again? I used print. This is not Python, this is C. Come to your senses, this is your native language. So yeah. Now let's run it again, shall we? And it's okay, there we go. For a second there I just thought it bugged. Enter grade, so let's say 90, and then a 70, 10, 20, 60, 65, 80. So as long as we don't enter negative 99, 999, what's gonna happen is that this loop is forever gonna continue unless we enter this value, which is our sentinel value, and then it's gonna print out the average for us. Okay, so the next type of loop that I'm gonna show you guys is gonna be the counter controlled loop. So before that, let me just comment this part of the code. Okay, so let's write a function to calculate the factorial of a given number. I'm just gonna say integer x, so it's gonna be integer x. So we're gonna need a counter value here, so it's going to be our I value. So we're going to say for I equals 0. This is the part where we set our counter to 0. So I, as long as I is less than x, so the second part is going to be the condition in a for loop. This part is the condition. And lastly, we're going to increment the I value as every single time the loop body is executed. So this is the rule, what happens every single time we execute. So this is typically how we would build a for loop. Usually you set it to 4, but in our case, we're gonna start our counter from 1, because in every iteration we're gonna be multiplying this fact value by our counter here. So say for example, if we're at 2, it's going to multiply it by 2. If we're at 3, it's going to be 3 times 2, so it's going to be 6. If we're at 4, it's going to be 4 times 6, 24, and so on and on and on. Okay, so oh, and lastly, we're going to need to say less than or equal to x, because we're calculating it's the factorial of a number. So say for an example, if it's 10 factorial, we're going to need to multiply this value by the 10 as well, hence we're including that 10 by doing that. So star equals I, and then lastly return fact. There we go. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to print the so actually let's just say the factorial equals this. So let's go for I don't know, 5 factorial, and then say 5 factorial 5. Now let's run this and see what happens. There we go. So this is it for actually, is it right? Oh yeah, it's right. Okay. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you liked the video, found it helpful, educational or enjoyable by any means, please make sure to like and subscribe. And as usual, have a nice day.